Hey guys, tonight we step straight into a world where the wind bites, the doors rattle, and the kind of cold that settles into your bones isn't just outside, it's living with you. You're waking up in the middle of a full-force frontier blizzard, the kind early American pioneers faced on the Great Plains. Long before central heating, long before insulated windows, and long before anyone in their right mind would say, "Sure, let's build a house right here in the middle of this frozen nowhere." Your eyelids open slowly. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress that crunches when you shift. The air in the room is so cold. Your breath rises in tiny clouds that drift upward, toward rafters crusted with frost. The cabin's log walls groan as the wind slams against them. And from beyond the shutters, the world is a white, swirling roar. It's the kind of morning where any reasonable person would say, "Nope, I refuse. Try again tomorrow." But pioneers didn't really get to make that call. They woke up anyway, in weather so brutal, it was known to kill livestock in minutes, and freeze spilled water instantly. And tonight, you're right there with them. A faint blue glow slips through the gaps in the shutters. Moonlight or morning, it's impossible to tell. Blizzards are race time. Out here, a storm can howl all night, then rise again for another 12 hours. Just because it feels like it. There's no fireplace warming this room. That's the part that shocks most modern listeners. We imagine every pioneer home with a cozy fire crackling nonstop, like some rustic survival commercial. But in reality, huge numbers of early settlers simply couldn't rely on fireplaces at all. Some cabins were too crude. Some were built with wet timber that smoked like a curse. Others sat in regions with barely any firewood. And some pioneers, especially in the plains, abandoned fireplaces entirely because the chimneys froze, crumbled, or filled with snow. So tonight, in this blizzard, you have no fire to wake up to, only the faint warmth of your blankets, the slow hum of your breath, and the knowledge that, as harsh as this moment is, it's exactly what tens of thousands of settlers lived through every winter. Your quilt is layered thick with wool scraps, bits of old clothing, and patches of whatever fabric people could salvage. Pioneer quilts weren't stylish decor pieces. They were survival gear. Sometimes they weighed as much as a small child. You shift your feet slightly and feel how stiff the edges are. The moisture from your breath last night has frozen into a delicate, glittering crust. It's beautiful and also very annoying. Like nature can't decide whether to comfort you or bully you. You lift the quilt, and a shock of cold air pours beneath it. You instantly regret everything. Your boots are frozen stiff near the doorway. Your water basin is a solid sheet of ice. The towel you used last night is frozen into the shape of a sad, snowy question mark. These are the kinds of mornings pioneers got used to. There's a strange comfort in the rhythm of it, though. The familiar misery of cold air. The familiar crunch of frost beneath your hands. The familiar sound of a blizzard so loud. It makes the cabin's nails vibrate. Some settlers claimed that during the harshest storms, they could hear distant voices calling through the wind. Historians still argue whether that was superstition, sound distortion, or simply the human brain trying to make sense of overwhelming noise. But if you sit quietly now, you can almost hear it, a shifting, layered moan in the storm. That could be wind or something else. You pull your blanket tighter. Your breath makes another cloud. The storm pounds at the shutters, as if demanding to be let in. And yet, you're safe. The cabin may be cold enough to make icicles in your hair, but it's a barrier between you and a frozen world that has no mercy. The pioneers knew that the real danger wasn't the storm outside, but letting panic creep in inside. They focused on tasks, small routines, tiny rituals of survival. This first moment of waking up, shivering, squinting into a dim cabin, mentally preparing for the day, is part of that ritual. You take a slow breath, then another, letting the cold settle around you, like a heavy, icy blanket. Even now, some small part of you adjusts, accepts, becomes quieter. And that's the rhythm we'll hold tonight. A slow, steady drift through the long, frozen nights of early America. But the worst was still to come, and the strangest, because soon you'll discover that pioneers had tricks for staying warm that seem impossible and downright bizarre to modern eyes. For now, you stay wrapped in your quilt, listening to the wind, knowing that sunrise won't necessarily bring warmth, but will bring answers. Answers to how people survive nights like this. Nights with no fireplace, no central heat, no electricity, only determination, luck, and a stubborn refusal to freeze. And as you take one last quiet breath, you sink just a little deeper into the moment, feeling the cold cabin around you, and knowing that this is only the beginning. The storm hasn't eased. If anything, it has settled in deeper, pressing itself against the cabin like a living thing. You pull yourself upright slowly, because sudden movements inside a freezing room feel like tearing a blanket off a sleeping cat. Everything in your body instantly regrets it. The cold is not just around you tonight. It's in the cabin, inside the walls, inside the beams, inside the floorboards. This is the kind of frontier cold that didn't ask permission. It simply moved in and started paying rent in frost. You rest your hand against one of the log walls. It's like touching polished stone. Your skin sticks for half a second before you pull away. That wasn't uncommon. Many pioneers wrote in diaries that they avoided touching walls at night because the cold bit the fingers like a jealous animal. And that's the strange truth settlers had to face. A cabin didn't protect you from cold. It just slowed its entry. Every cabin crack is whistling softly. Little threads of icy air curl into the room, like ghostly fingers testing the warmth. That's because these homes were built fast, often by 2 or 3 hands, with tools that weren't even sharp half the time. Cabins went up in a hurry, because winter never cared about deadlines. Between the logs, the chinking, that mix of mud, moss, straw, and whatever else people could find, has frozen and cracked. If you lean in close, you'll see tiny crystals, glittering like crushed glass in the gaps. You can almost imagine the cold sliding its way through the cracks, stretching, settling, as if it means to spend the whole season in here with you. And honestly, it probably does. A soft creak echoes overhead. You look up and see a thin feather of frost, falling from the rafters like powdered sugar. Those rafters are swollen with ice. In some cabins, the ice layer grew so thick that pioneers joked they didn't need a ceiling. The winter had built one for them. There are historical accounts from the Dakotas of settlers waking to half-inch frost sheets, forming on the underside of their roofs. You're looking at one now, thin but growing, like nature slowly taking over the architecture. A question forms quietly in your mind. Why didn't the entire cabin just warm up from body heat? It's a fair thought, but early frontier cabins had the insulation efficiency of a soggy cardboard box. No insulation, no vapor barriers, no double-glazed anything. Just logs, gaps, and the hope that God was in a good mood. The cold didn't need an invitation. It walked right in. You tugged the quilt around your shoulders and let your eyes travel along the floorboards. The wind, the same wind screaming outside, is pushing icy air through the gaps in the floor, lifting bits of straw from between the planks. It's surreal, like the cabin is breathing, and not a warm breath, either. A long, frosty exhale that curls around your ankles. You shift again, carefully, trying to keep the quilt tight around you. Your toes brush the floor, and you jolt. It's colder than the walls. Cabin floors could reach temperatures low enough to freeze spilled tea in minutes. One pioneer diary from Minnesota describes water freezing on the floor, even with the family still awake and moving about. It sounds impossible, but with no insulation and constant airflow, the floor essentially became a shallow freezer, with a roof on top. Historically documented, completely real, and completely miserable. A soft tapping sound interrupts your thoughts. At first you think someone is at the door, but no, it's the nails. As the temperature drops, The wood contracts, and old hand-forged nails begin to shift, creaking in their sockets. It makes a rhythmic tapping, almost like fingers drumming politely. Pioneers knew this sound well. Some found it comforting, proof the cabin was holding together. Others thought it was the spirits of winter, knocking to be let in. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in fading European folklore, or simply the product of long, lonely winters that played games with the imagination. You run your thumb along the quilt's frozen edge. It crunches faintly like thin glass. Then another sound rises, a long, sharp pop from somewhere behind you. That's the sound of the cabin timber, adjusting under cold stress. Wood expands in humidity and contracts in severe cold. When a blizzard hits, the shift can be so abrupt that beams crack like rifle shots. Some settlers wrote that these sounds were more frightening than the wolves. You exhale softly, and your breath floats upward. It lingers in the air so long. You can watch it drift. The cold inside this room acts like a strange, suspended world, where even small movements feel amplified. You stretch a hand toward the shutter. A thin draft seeps through it. You rub your fingers together and feel the numbness already creeping in. Imagine living like this for months. No insulation, no steady warmth, just routines, quilts, and stubbornness. But pioneers weren't helpless. You'll see soon the tricks and techniques they relied on to stay alive in homes colder inside than some winter mornings outside. For now, though, this is the reality. A cabin where cold lives in the walls, in the gaps, in the beams, as much a resident as the family inside. And the night is far from over. You tighten the quilt around your shoulders, and for a moment, you instinctively glance toward the hearth. Except there's no hearth, no fireplace, no smoldering coals, no gentle orange glow promising warmth. Just a cold, dark corner where a fireplace should be. In the comforting version of history we grew up with, you breathe out slowly. Your breath fogs in front of you, a quiet reminder that tonight, like so many pioneer nights, you're sleeping in a home that has absolutely zero direct heat source. It feels impossible, almost irresponsible, like building a submarine without a hull. But this was reality for countless early American settlers, especially on the Great Plains, where trees were so rare that travelers wrote journals describing entire horizons without a single stick of wood. The well-known historical fact is this: many early sod houses, dugouts, and frontier cabins had no permanent fireplace at all. Some had outdoor fire pits. Some used tiny stoves. Some had chimneys that collapsed every winter and were simply abandoned. And some families, especially those who just arrived, or lost their chimney in a storm, or were living in temporary shelters, relied entirely on quilts, shared heat, and pure grit. You rub your arms through the quilt. Sleeping without a fire sounds miserable, and it was. But it was also a calculated survival decision. Fire was not always your friend. A fireplace meant smoke, and smoke meant drafts, and drafts meant losing what little warm air you had. In poorly built cabins, a fire could make the room colder. A strange but true pioneer paradox. The heat pulled in so much freezing air through cracks in walls and floors that the benefit barely outweighed the loss. Some settlers realized this quickly. Others figured it out the hard way, with journal entries describing nights where a fire burned brightly, yet frost still formed on blankets. A soft creak from the shutters reminds you that the wind outside is still raging, still pushing cold through every microscopic gap. If you lit a fire tonight, you'd lose heat faster than you could make it. So the pioneers adapted. You shift your quilt and look around the cabin. Signs of those adaptations are everywhere. On a small wooden bench, there are river stones. Smooth, heavy, and cold right now. The same stones pioneers heated earlier in the day, when the weather was still manageable. These warming stones were wrapped in rags and tucked near feet in bed to release their stored heat through the night. But they had one flaw. They lost their warmth. In a matter of hours. Cold always won that battle. Near the bed is a pile of quilts. Thick, mismatched, patched so many times. They look more like topographical maps than blankets. Quilting bees weren't social events at first. They were survival workshops. Women gathered to sew. Because having one quilt wasn't enough. Families needed stacks. 5, 6, 10 layers in the coldest weeks. You press your hand to the top quilt. It's rough and scratchy, but wonderfully thick. Then there's the buffalo robe, folded in the corner. A prized possession. One robe could hold in more warmth than several quilts combined. But not every pioneer had access to one. And hunting buffalo wasn't exactly a casual weekend project. There's also something else here. A bundle of dry grass, tightly packed in cloth. It looked strange, but this was another survival trick. Stuffing empty quilt spaces with grass. To make cheap, disposable insulation. Not beautiful, not comfortable, but effective. You shift again, and notice the shutter edges. Packed with old rags. Another trick. Settlers knew that wind sealing could raise the cabin temperature by several precious degrees. So they stuffed rags, dried moss, or scraps into every crack they could reach, especially at night. You run your hand across one of the rags and feel how frozen it is. Even the insulation freezes. The candle stub on the table is blackened but unlit. Lighting it would give a little light, but no real warmth. Candles barely took the chill off. Some settlers slept with lanterns burning for psychological comfort alone. Others refused because they believed it tempted the cold spirits. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were literal or simply metaphors families used to describe the uncanny noises a freezing cabin makes at night. In the corner, your breath hangs longer than before. You're starting to understand that sleeping without a fire was less an act of bravery and more an unavoidable fact of frontier life. The cabins weren't warm. The walls weren't sealed. The wind wasn't polite. And yet, people slept. Families slept. Children slept. Not deeply, not luxuriously, but enough to rise the next morning and continue the struggle. You tuck your feet closer under the quilt and listen to the storm. The walls creak. The wind groans. The cold presses in on all sides. But you also start to notice the pockets of heat you're creating, the warm space beneath the quilt, the gentle rise of your breath, the faint, trapped warmth between your body and the straw mattress. This was the secret, the quiet truth of pioneer survival. The fire wasn't in the cabin. It wasn't in a hearth. It wasn't in burning logs or glowing coals. The fire was you, your body heat, your blankets, your breath, your stubbornness, your determination to endure what the storm threw at you. That's how they survived nights like this. Not with roaring flames, but with a flame you carry inside. And tonight, that flame is what's keeping you alive. You pull the quilt closer and slowly begin to realize something. Pioneer nights like this didn't just happen. They followed a ritual, a predictable, necessary, almost sacred routine, performed every single evening. When winter dug its claws into the frontier, you shift on the straw mattress, listening to the muffled roar of the storm outside. It's impossible not to wonder how anyone slept through this. But pioneers didn't rely on luck. They prepared for the cold, the same way travelers prepare for long flights today, with a checklist, a ritual, a sequence, a set of actions repeated so often that it became muscle memory. Tonight, you get to live it. You swing your legs out of bed and instantly regret it. The air below the quilt feels like liquid ice. Your feet touch the floorboards. A mistake, because they're colder than the walls, colder than the window shutters, colder than anything should legally be. You take a breath and begin the first step in the frontier bedtime ritual. Step 1. Check the shutters. You move toward the window. Your breath fogs in front of you, hanging like a tiny ghost, guiding your path. You press your hand against the wooden shutter. It's vibrating faintly, under the force of the wind outside. The edges are stuffed with cloth and moss, all frozen stiff. You adjust one loose corner and instantly feel a needle of icy air slice across your wrist, a reminder that the world outside is not a place for humans tonight. Step 2. Beat the blankets. You lift the top quilt and shake it gently. A shower of frost crystals falls from the underside, glittering briefly like crushed stars, before settling on the floor. This wasn't for beauty. Pioneers knew that frost buildup could melt from body heat, soaking blankets and turning them dangerously cold by morning. So they shook the quilts nightly to keep them dry and insulating. Imagine doing laundry, but for crystals of winter falling from a sky inside your house. Step 3. Fluff the straw. You kneel beside the mattress. It's lumpy, tired, and flattened from long nights of survival. You reach under the edge and pull loose a handful of straw to redistribute it. It makes a soft whispering sound as you shift it around, the dry grass creating little pockets of trapped air. This wasn't just comfort, it was physics. Straw held heat. Even small adjustments could make the difference between shivering all night or just mildly suffering. A marginal curiosity historians often note is that some settlers mix straw with old horsehair to improve insulation. It sounds odd, but frontier life rarely had the luxury of normal solutions. Step 4. Warm what you can. You pick up a river stone from the bench. It's cold now, hard and unforgiving, but earlier in the day, it was heated beside a stove or carried inside after basking in rare sunlight. You rub your thumb along its surface and imagine how good it would feel, tucked near your feet. These stones, primitive as they are, were lifesavers, but they came with quirks. Some cracked from rapid temperature changes. Some got too hot and scorched bedding, and some pioneers complained. They attracted mice seeking warmth. Still, they persisted, because heat was heat, no matter how strange the source. Step 5. Seal the door. You cross the tiny cabin and approach the front door. The storm is louder here, the wood rattling in its frame, like an animal trying to escape the cold. You check the ragged quilt, stuffed along the bottom seam. It's half frozen, but still doing its job, blocking the wind's icy fingers. Some settlers even use snow as insulation at the doorstep, pushing drifts against the door to slow the draft inside. It sounds counterintuitive, unless you remember that snow, despite being frozen, is full of trapped air and functions like nature's own insulation. Historians still argue how widespread this technique was, versus how often it's been romanticized by later accounts. But you can see why it makes sense on a night like this. Step 6. Layer everything. You gather your quilts, your robe, your grass-filled cloth bundles, and begin layering them on the bed. One layer to trap your body heat, another to seal it in, another to block the drafts, another because the first wasn't enough, and another because this blizzard has no intention of being polite. Layering became so essential that some pioneers described their nighttime setup as wearing the bed rather than sleeping in it. You look at your sleeping place now, a mound of cloth, fur, and hope, and know exactly what they meant. Step 7. Get under fast. With everything ready, you slide under the quilts as quickly as possible. The air inside is shockingly cold at first, a little cave of winter darkness. But you curl in, tuck the edges around your shoulders, and wait. Slowly, the heat from your body begins to build, a small, fragile warmth, growing in a world of ice. Your breath softens, your muscles loosen. The cold is still there. It never leaves, but you have carved out a pocket of safety. Against it, this was the ritual, night after night, storm after storm, a dance between humans, and a climate intent on humbling them. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cozy. It wasn't anything like the winter cabins you see in holiday movies. But it worked, and because it worked, family survived. You settle deeper under the quilts, listening to the cold press against the walls, and you feel a quiet pride swell in your chest. You've done the ritual. You've earned the warmth and the night. long and merciless as it is, will be just a little softer now. But new challenges wait beyond this moment, because the next secret the pioneers learned is how the human body itself became the frontier's last line of defense. Against nights like this, you lie beneath the heavy quilts, feeling the tiny pocket of warmth you've managed to build, when a quiet truth settles over you. Pioneers didn't survive winter nights alone. They survived them together. The frontier could freeze water in minutes and turn iron brittle, but it also forced families into a simple, unavoidable truth of physics. A group of humans is warmer than one. Tonight, you feel that truth as you shift, curling deeper into the bedding, just as early settlers did, huddling not out of affection, though affection certainly helped, but out of pure, uncompromising necessity. Your mattress sinks slightly, as if someone else is climbing in beside you. Imagine a family of 5 or 6, doing the same every night, a cluster of bodies arranged like a living furnace. Children usually slept toward the center, because heat rises, and little bodies lost warmth the fastest. Adults positioned themselves around them, forming a protective ring. That would have made perfect sense to any Arctic explorer, a well-known historical fact. In many pioneer cabins, entire families shared a single bed in winter, no matter the age, no matter the modesty norms of the era. Survival rearranged the rules. You tuck your feet in tighter, imagining the warmth of so many bodies. Press close in the cold. It makes the cabin feel less lonely. A gentle breeze, barely more than a whisper, slides through a floorboard seam. You instinctively shift closer to the center of the bed, mimicking the way frontier families learn to avoid the icy outer edges. It's here that the pioneer innovation became almost creative, because families didn't just sleep together. They strategically layered themselves. There was the blanket, then a quilt, then the first layer of bodies, then another quilt, then more bodies if needed, then buffalo robes on top. A human sandwich, a survival lasagna, equal parts physics and desperation. It sounds funny now, and you're allowed to smile. Frontier life was bleak, but humor always sneaks in, wherever humans suffer together. Still, the method worked. Under the right layers, the temperature in the bed could be 20 to 40 degrees warmer than the surrounding cabin. You close your eyes and picture how different this scene would look. From the outside, a small log home in a violent blizzard. Yet inside, a cluster of people is manufacturing their own private summer. And then, there was the most peculiar technique of all, bundling. You run your hand along the quilt edge, imagining how it worked. Bundling was the practice of wrapping 2 or more people together in shared bedding so tightly that heat loss was minimized. The idea existed in Europe, but pioneers perfected it out of necessity. Sometimes husband and wife bundled together, sometimes siblings, sometimes entire groups of children, sometimes during the worst cold snaps, neighbors sharing a home, bundled without hesitation. Survival erased the awkwardness. One marginal curiosity, recorded in some frontier journals, describes babies being wrapped between 2 older siblings, like dough between loaves, to keep them warm at night. It worked, and many children survived winters, only because of this improvised human insulation. Another detail most people forget: heat wasn't just radiating from bodies. It was trapped in breath. Under multiple quilts, warm air filled the shared space below the covers, creating a tiny microclimate, far more comfortable than the freezing air above. If you lift a corner now, you can feel the difference instantly. The warmth under the blankets, escaping like steam from a pot. That's why pioneers moved quickly. When getting in and out, every second the cover lifted was heat lost to the night. A sudden groan from the rafters makes you flinch. The storm must be picking up again. Wind whistles through the chinking, like an angry flute. You pull the bedding tighter. Another known fact: in some regions, families even slept with sleeping caps. knitted wool hats designed to prevent heat loss from the head. Nightcaps weren't fashion statements. They were survival gear. You brush your hairline, and imagine slipping on one of those caps. Snug and scratchy, but warm in all the right ways. It's easy to see how all these techniques slowly transformed a miserable night into something bearable, even in rare moments. Cozy, but as you settle deeper into your imagined family furnace, you also begin to understand the emotional weight of such closeness. People didn't just share warmth. They shared breath, shared fears, shared exhaustion, shared the sound of storms that shook the very walls around them. This closeness didn't always bring peace. Arguments happened. Elbows met ribs. Someone always snored. Someone always hogged the covers. But when temperatures dropped to life-threatening lows, people held each other anyway, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Historians still debate how idealized family closeness during pioneer winters really was, whether it strengthened bonds or simply created new tensions in cramped living conditions. But the truth is probably both, love and irritation. Sleeping side by side, beneath the same quilt, you take a slow breath, feeling the cabin air sting your nose before it warms under the bedding. For just a moment, you understand exactly how pioneers survived the coldest months, not through fireplaces, not through architecture, not through luck, but through each other. You settle deeper, the warmth building little by little, layer by layer. Your body is doing what generations before yours did, becoming its own heater, its own shield, its own quiet flame in a world of ice. And as you rest there, aware of the cold pressing outside, you feel the subtle, steady truth. You are warmer now than when you were alone. In the frontier, that difference meant everything. You breathe a little easier now, wrapped in quilts, your body slowly building its fragile pocket of warmth. But even as you settle deeper, another realization surfaces. The cabin you're lying in was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be possible. Frontier shelters weren't crafted for beauty or long-term comfort. They were built fast, with whatever materials lay closest at hand, because winter didn't wait for craftsmanship. And tonight, as the blizzard rages outside, you begin to see the genius and the desperation in the strange shapes and structures pioneers built to survive. A slow creak echoes overhead. You look around the small cabin, and suddenly you're aware that this building is only one version of many shelters early settlers relied on. Shelters that were loud, strange, crude, and sometimes shockingly effective. You shift your weight, letting the blankets fall around your shoulders. As you picture the other structures pioneers slept in during winters like this. The first was the sod house. Not a cabin at all, but a home carved from the earth herself. Thick walls of sod, layers of grass and soil stacked like bricks, served as insulation far better than freshly cut timber ever could. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. The dense, cool darkness of a sod house interior, the smell of damp soil, the muffled quality of every sound, as if you're sleeping in a natural cave. Sod houses didn't splinter in storms. They didn't creak like the cabin around you. They absorbed the wind instead of fighting it. A well-known historical fact. Sod homes were so quiet inside that settlers claimed they could sleep through raging blizzards without hearing more than a soft hum. But sod houses had quirks too. Roots sprouted through walls. Snakes nestled in the cool earth. Mud sometimes dripped indoors. During rapid thaws, you inhale softly, imagining the walls alive, with little intrusions of nature. A marginal curiosity. Some sod houses grew wildflowers inside the home in spring, because the soil still carried dormant seeds. It wasn't ideal, but pioneers didn't ask for ideal. They asked for warm. Then there were dugouts, shelters carved directly into hillsides. You picture it now, a doorway cut into the slope, like the entrance to a hobbit home, but far less whimsical Inside, the ground is cold but steady. The temperature rarely plummets, as sharply as the open air. And though dugouts were cramped, dark, and occasionally prone to flooding, they offered one of the most stable winter shelters a family could build quickly. Historians still argue whether dugouts should be considered homes or simply emergency shelters used during the worst storms. But for many pioneers, they were a primary residence for years at a time. Imagine falling asleep in a room carved from the earth, the walls rough beneath your fingers, the ceiling only inches above your head, and yet feeling safer than you do in a wooden cabin, groaning under the weight of the wind. Another creak makes you flinch. This cabin complains constantly. A dugout wouldn't. You picture now the third kind of shelter, the lean-to, a desperate, temporary structure built from branches, hides, and snow. When caught far from home, you imagine stacking pine branches against the trunk of a massive tree, then pressing snow against the outside to create an insulating layer. Lean-tos weren't meant for comfort. They were meant to keep a person alive through a single night, maybe two, when a storm hit unexpectedly. If you've been traveling across the prairie and the blizzard struck without warning, you would have built one of these. With shaking hands and fading daylight, you settle deeper under the quilts, grateful that your shelter tonight, however crude, has actual walls. Then comes the strangest of all, the snow shelter. Not an igloo, not a sculpted dome, but simply a hollow carved from a drift. Pioneers learned from indigenous nations that snow traps air, and air means insulation. You imagine crawling into a hollowed snowbank, enclosing the entrance with hides, lying on a bed of pine branches, and breathing warm air into your tiny frozen cave. The blizzard outside would howl, but inside, it would be eerily calm, a cocoon of cold silence, with surprisingly stable warmth. You run your fingers across the quilt, thinking about how counterintuitive that sounds. Sleeping inside snow to escape freezing temperatures. But it worked. Some accounts describe people emerging from snow shelters after nights so warm that frost melted from their clothing. You shift again and listen as the cabin timbers groan under wind. A snow shelter wouldn't groan. It would simply sit, solid and indifferent, a creation of the storm itself. You take a slow breath and realize how adaptable people had to be, how fearless, how inventive. The frontier wasn't a place where comfort was guaranteed. It was a place where survival meant learning to live in buildings that were half home, half improvisation, and half stubborn defiance. Yes, that's three halves. Frontier life broke math too. You look around the cabin again, the rattling shutters, the icy floor, the walls breathing cold. It's far from perfect, but compared to a lean-to, made from branches and prayer, this place is a palace. A silent warmth builds in your chest as you settle deeper, understanding now that every shelter, from sod houses to dugouts to snow caves, wasn't just architecture. It was human ingenuity against impossible odds. And as the storm continues, you feel that ingenuity settling over you, like a second quilt, because the cold is getting worse, the night is getting darker, and the pioneers were about to discover that sometimes snow itself was their most unexpected ally. The storm outside is still roaring, still clawing at the cabin with icy fingers, still burying the world in white. But somewhere in the quiet between wind gusts, you begin to sense something strange, something the pioneers learned slowly, reluctantly, and only after a few terrifying winters. Snow, as monstrous as it looks, wasn't always the enemy. Sometimes, it was the only friend they had. You shift beneath the quilts, feeling the cold pressing at every seam of the cabin, and you notice the faintest change in the air. A soft, muted pressure, like a blanket draped over the outside world. That's when you realize what's happening. The snow is piling higher. It's drifting against the walls. It's creeping up the sides of the cabin. like a slow, silent tide. And strangely, you feel a tiny bit warmer, just enough for your nose to stop stinging. You sit with that feeling for a moment. How can a world made of ice warm anything? But that was the frontier paradox. Snow, dangerous, relentless, unforgiving, was also nature's best insulation. A known historical fact. Snowdrifts around pioneer cabins helped keep interior temperatures higher, sometimes by as much as 10 to 20 degrees. Not warm, just less lethal. You run a hand along the quilt, and imagine stepping outside, seeing your cabin half buried, a strange little mound, in a world of white. It looks claustrophobic. It looks frightening. It also looks like survival. You shift again, and picture how the snow presses against the logs from the outside, blocking the wind, filling the gaps, creating a barrier that the pioneers themselves never could have built so effectively. The cabin stops rattling as fiercely. The draft along the floor weakens slightly. The cold is still brutal, but it's no longer a predator, slipping through every seam. Snow has become a shield. You breathe out slowly, and the breath hovers in front of you, lingering longer than before. Even your breath seems to sense the small rise in temperature. But the relationship between settlers and snow wasn't just practical. It was emotional, complicated, sometimes superstitious. Many believed snow was alive, a creature with moods, friendly when it sealed the home, deadly when it drifted across doors, and trapped families inside. Some diaries describe snowdrifts that reached the roofs of cabins so completely that settlers tunneled out, like animals in burrows. A marginal curiosity, pioneers of the northern plains sometimes carved snow vent holes near the tops of their cabins to allow smoke from small stoves to escape after the door was buried shut. It sounds absurd, like living in a snow cave while still inside a house. But it worked. You shift your weight beneath the quilts and imagine the feeling of opening the front door to find nothing but a wall of packed white. Terrifying and comforting, a combination only the frontier could produce. Historians still argue whether pioneers relied actively on drifting snow or simply accepted it when it came. Some records show families deliberately shoveling snow up against the cabin walls for insulation. Others insist this was rare and mostly happened by accident during storms like the one outside your window now. But intentional or not, the effect was the same. Snow became a blanket, and blankets, especially natural ones, were sacred in the frontier winter. Another curious technique. Settlers sometimes packed snow inside walls during construction, layering it between logs and sod to make a temporary seal against vicious winter winds. The snow would eventually melt, but in January didn't care. You let your fingers trail along the quilt. And think about the strange relationship people once had with winter. Snow wasn't romantic then. No holiday postcards. No cozy cabin fantasies. It was something closer to a wild animal. Dangerous, but useful. If you respected it, you remember the cold night air, seeping through floorboards earlier. Now the draft feels weaker, calmer, less vicious, almost shy. The logs expand slightly as the cold outside becomes less extreme. A soft groan echoes from the rafters, not the painful kind from earlier, but something almost relieved. The cabin is warming by inches. Not enough for comfort, but enough for survival. That was the pioneer bargain. You give something to the winter, and in return, the winter doesn't kill you. You take a slow breath and listen closely. The wind is still howling, but now it sounds farther away, muffled by the thick cocoon of snow wrapping around your walls. Nature has sealed the home more effectively than any human-made insulation. For the first time tonight, you feel the faintest hint of safety, not warmth, not yet, but protection, a barrier between you and the endless white outside. You nestle deeper into the quilts, your muscles slowly unwinding as the cabin settles under the drifts. You understand now why early settlers stopped fearing the snow. the same way they feared the wind. The wind cuts. The wind steals warmth. The wind hunts. But snow settles. Snow stays. Snow shields. It becomes a hushed, frozen ally against the storm that created it. And as the night grows darker, you begin to feel why pioneers whispered a sleepy, grateful truth to one another. During winters like this, let it drift, let it pile, let it protect us. The cabin is quieter now, not because the storm has calmed, but because the snow has thickened into a dense, insulating shell. You can feel it in the air, still cold, still sharp on your skin, but no longer actively hunting you. This is the moment when pioneers reached for their most reliable allies, the tools, objects, and odd inventions that made nights like this survivable. You shift under the quilts, and your eyes drift toward the small table, beside the straw mattress, laid out there in a neat but battered arrangement, are the objects a family might rely on to battle the cold. A tin lantern, a stub of a candle, a hand axe, a thick buffalo robe, and a cast-iron pot, still holding a faint, memory-like warmth from a day's cooking. None of it looks impressive. To modern eyes, nothing seems like special equipment. But for pioneers, these are the tools. Between life and death, you reach toward the lantern first. Your fingers brush the metal. Icy, unforgiving. Lanterns weren't heaters, but their glow gave comfort. The psychological warmth mattered as much as the physical. When the storm howled so violently that families couldn't hear themselves think, a lantern's flicker was an anchor in the chaos. It said, light still exists. We are not swallowed. Yet lanterns were dangerous too. They ate up precious fuel and tempted fires in homes built of dry, splinter-ready timber. A well-known historical fact. House fires were more common than hypothermia in some frontier settlements, especially during deep winter, when lanterns and candles burned constantly in tightly enclosed spaces. You set the lantern down carefully. Next, your eyes drift to the buffalo robe. Thick, heavy, and dark. If quilts were the soul of winter survival, buffalo robes were the armor. You run your fingers along the fur. It's coarse at first, but soft underneath, designed by nature to keep a 1-ton animal warm in temperatures that would kill a human in minutes. Wearing one indoors was like wrapping yourself in a living furnace. A marginal curiosity, many settlers preferred buffalo robes to manufactured blankets because the robes didn't freeze as easily. Even moisture trapped in the fur didn't turn to rigid ice the way cloth did. When pioneers slept outside, or tried to, a buffalo robe was often the single most important item they owned. You lower the robe gently and look at the cast-iron pot, cold now, still holding the ghost of yesterday's heat. Cast iron was a pioneer's best friend, not for cooking only, but for warmth. A pot of hot water, left near the bed, radiated heat for hours. Small but precious. Some families filled pots with stones instead of water, and placed them under quilts to create slow, steady warmth. Others heated pots and wrapped them in cloth to put at the foot of the bed. Primitive hot water bottles that lasted longer than river stones. And of course, cast iron doubled as emergency protection. If wolves approached a homestead, the pot was close at hand. No one said frontier tools had to be elegant. Another groan echoes from the rafters, and you instinctively glance upward as the cabin shifts against the weight of the storm. Your eyes fall next to the hand axe. Its wooden handle is worn smooth from years of use. The blade is duller than you'd like, a reminder that pioneers rarely had the luxury of perfect sharpening stones. But even in winter, the axe was essential. It chopped firewood when there was wood to chop. It broke apart frozen sod. It carved small trenches for drainage when melting snow threatened a cabin. It chipped ice from water barrels. It cracked animal bones to get at the fatty marrow that kept people warm from the inside out. And if someone needed to build a quick lean-to in a sudden whiteout, an axe was the foundation of that shelter. You pick it up for a moment and feel the balance of it. Primitive, but reassuring. Historians still debate whether early settlers handled their tools with skill or simply brute forced their way through daily survival. The truth is probably both. Next to the axe, the little candle stub waits. It gives barely any light. When lit, almost no warmth. And yet, families treasured these scraps as if they were gold. A single candle could last several nights. If rationed well, it allowed mothers to sew patches into quilts. It let fathers mend tools. It let children read just a few precious pages from a worn book. Before the flame sputtered out, you imagine the gentle glow, your breath rising through the warm halo, the shadows dancing faintly on the walls. A candle flame felt like hope, but your eyes slide now to perhaps the most unexpected object of all, the metal shovel propped near the door. You didn't notice it before because it blended with the dim cabin light, but now it stands out like a sentinel. The shovel was crucial in a way people today rarely think about. You needed it to dig out the entrance when snowdrifts piled to the top of the frame, to carve breathing holes if drifts blocked the windows, to chip ice around the cabin before it crushed the chinking, to scoop snow for melting drinking water when the barrels froze solid. In an extreme cold, when the ground was frozen like stone, the shovel could spark against rocks to create emergency fire-starting fragments. When kindling ran low, pioneers didn't romanticize tools. They lived or died by them. A faint sigh escapes you as you settle deeper into the quilts, eyes drifting from object to object. Around the cabin, lantern, candle, buffalo robe, cast iron pot, hand axe, shovel, piles of quilts, warming stones, a rickety chair, a drafty shutter, a floor sprinkled with frost. Nothing here looks luxurious. Nothing feels modern. Nothing seems designed to fight the kind of cold slamming against the cabin tonight. And yet, this was enough. Just enough. Enough for a family to make it through another winter night. You breathe out softly. Your breath hangs in the air like a pale cloud before dissolving into the dimness. Tomorrow, you'll face new dangers because the frontier never ran out. Nights can always get colder. Storms can always get worse. But for now, you settle in with the tools of the frozen night. Around you, your quiet guardians, your silent companions, your fragile lifeline in a world carved from ice. The quilts are warm against your skin now, your breath soft and steady. The cabin wrapped in its cocoon of snow. But as you sink deeper into this tiny pocket of safety, another truth rises to the surface. Not every pioneer had a cabin to sleep in. When the blizzard came, sometimes the storm found you in the middle of nowhere, on the open plains, on a frozen trail, in a wagon, with miles of empty white in every direction. Tonight, you imagine yourself there, caught far from home. As the sky turns vicious, you open your eyes, and the cabin disappears. You're standing beside a creaking wagon on a prairie so wide, it feels like the world has forgotten its edges. The wind is a wall of needles. Snow slams sideways across your clothes, stinging your face, clinging to your eyelashes, until everything blurs. Your horse snorts, breath erupting in thick white clouds that instantly freeze at the edges. Even the animal seems confused, its instincts screaming that this is no ordinary storm. You pull your coat tighter. The fabric is rough, wool-stitched over wool, barely thick enough for a night like this. You turn your back to the wind and try to see the road, but visibility has fallen to less than an arm's length. A whiteout, the frontier's deadliest disguise. People didn't fear the cold most. They feared losing the world within it. You run your hands along the wagon canvas and feel the wind trying to rip it loose. Travelers often wrote that during whiteouts, the world became a sound rather than a place. It's true. Snow is no longer something you see. It's something you hear and something you feel. Your heart is pounding now because you know what must happen next. You're not making a home tonight. No one outruns a blizzard. Not a pioneer. Not a mountain man. Not even someone who knows the trail by heart. Storms erase trails. Erase landmarks. Erase the sky. So you do what pioneers always did. You stop. You shelter. You survive. You pull the wagon to a halt. Tie the reins. And force your numb fingers to start the survival routine. First, you crawl into the wagon's interior. It's dark, cramped, and smells faintly of grain dust and leather. But shelter, just barely. Inside the canvas cover, the wind becomes a muffled roar. Your breath hangs in the air, like pale smoke. You spread a buffalo robe across the floor, your joints aching as you kneel. Every motion is stiff from the cold. Your hands tremble as you retrieve the woolen blankets you packed weeks ago. When you wrap one around yourself, the warmth is immediate, but fragile, like a match against a hurricane. Your body heat will be your only heater tonight. You sit against the wagon wall, feeling the canvas shake as the storm slams into it. Wagons were not built for winter comfort. Thin, wooden frames and stretch cloth offered only the illusion of safety. A well-known historical fact. Many pioneers froze to death inside their own wagons when storms overtook them on the trail. But many survived too, by doing exactly what you're doing. You curl deeper into the blankets and pull the buffalo robe to your chest. The fur is thick, dense, warm from decades of nature's design. Then you take the next step. You lie down, but not flat. Pioneers slept curled, knees tucked to chest, back against something solid. This position preserved core heat and protected vital organs. During long, freezing nights, you adjust your body, finding the posture your ancestors mastered through necessity. The wagon rocks with each gust. Snow begins piling around the wheels, against the canvas, against the world. You close your eyes, and in that darkness, you picture another kind of traveler. The mountain men. They lived through winters that made blizzards like this seem almost polite. They slept under hides, with only a fire the size of a fist. They curled under pine boughs, in trenches dug by hand. Some even learned to build snow hollows from indigenous mentors. When caught far from camp, it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't romantic, but it kept them alive. Historians still argue whether mountain men were genuinely skilled winter survivors or simply endured more hardship than any human sensibly should. Their journals swing wildly between triumph and misery, a reminder that mastery and suffering often look the same in hindsight. You shift under the buffalo robe. Your breath warms your chest beneath the layers. Slowly, your body starts building its own small climate of heat inside this fragile cocoon. Outside, the storm screams. Inside, you are still, and though sleep seems impossible, pioneers did sleep. In nights like this, they slept because exhaustion demanded it, because the body cannot stay awake forever, because hope tasted better in the morning than in the dark. Your limbs grow heavier. The wind's roars fade into a steady, rhythmic pulse. Against the wagon frame, you curl tighter, and the truth settles in. You're surviving, just as they did, just as thousands survived. Whiteout nights on trails across the frontier, wrapped in wool, fur, fear, and a stubborn refusal to let the cold win. Because tomorrow, if you endure, you'll have a chance to see the world again. But for now, you sleep in the storm's blind eye, wrapped in blankets, curled like a winter animal, hidden inside a tiny shelter the blizzard has not yet claimed. And for this night alone, that is enough. The storm fades into a distant hum as you imagine yourself waking up, not in a cabin, not in a wagon, but under the open sky, buried in snow, wrapped in hides, and surrounded by a silence so deep, it feels like the world has stopped breathing. This is how the mountain men slept, not by choice, but because the mountains demanded it. These were the trappers, scouts, and wanderers who lived lives half-tamed, half-wild, moving between trading posts, an untouched wilderness, in a rhythm few humans today could endure for a single week. Their winters made pioneer winters look almost polite. And tonight, you crawl into their world. You imagine the scene. A snow-packed ridge, a stand of pines bowing under the weight of the storm, and a man, leather-clad, fur-wrapped, face wind-burned and frost-scarred, digging himself a bed, with movements so practiced. They almost look gentle. Mountain men rarely slept above the snow. Above was where the wind lived, where the cold sharpened itself, where exhaustion became danger. Below, in trenches, hollows, and scooped snow beds, was where life waited. A well-known historical fact. Mountain men often dug narrow trenches in the snow and slept inside them, lined with pine boughs and covered with buffalo robes, to trap and recycle heat. You lower yourself into the imagined trench now. Your hands brush the pine needles, their scent sharp and resinous. A layer of hide covers the top, forming a small, loosely sealed cocoon. Your breath warms the cramped space quickly, condensing into droplets that freeze. On the inner surface of the hide, it is tight, dark, still, and surprisingly warm. The technique wasn't unique to mountain men. Indigenous nations across North America had perfected snow shelter sleeping for centuries before trappers arrived. The men who learned from them survived. Those who didn't became winter tragedies. Historians still debate how much knowledge mountain men took from indigenous mentors versus how much they reinvented through painful trial and error. The truth is somewhere in between. A partnership, a blending, a shared legacy of winter wisdom. You shift gently, feeling the pine boughs beneath you. Compress into a soft, prickly mattress. The cold seeps upward, but slowly, very slowly. The hide above traps your heat. Your breath warms your chest. Your knees curl toward your body. And suddenly, this cramped, icy hollow feels safer than any drafty cabin. You open your eyes and picture how a mountain man looked just before sleep. Fur hat pulled low, moccasins tucked under the robe, hands inside his coat to protect fingers from frostbite. No lantern, no stove, no wall to keep out the storm. Just instinct, experience, and tools worn by wind and time. The mountain man's gear forms itself in your imagination. A powder horn, a flintlock rifle, a knife in a leather sheath, all laid beside him in the snow trench. So nothing froze overnight. Their rifles sometimes malfunctioned. If moisture froze in the barrel, knives could snap. If blades became brittle, mountain men knew this with bone-deep certainty. Their relationship with the cold wasn't fear, it was respect, constant and humbling. One marginal curiosity, found in several journals, describes mountain men sleeping with their gunpowder tucked inside their shirts to prevent it from freezing or clumping. A risky, uncomfortable practice, but a necessary one. You adjust your breathing, feeling the warmth build inside the trench with every slow inhale. And then you imagine the other method mountain men used. The fire trench, a long, narrow pit, dug beside the sleeping hollow. In it a small fire burned, long and low, fed with tiny twigs, instead of thick logs. A modest flame, just enough to warm the air, without burning through precious fuel. The fire trench gave off a gentle glow that flickered through the hides and cast faint red light across the snow. When the fire died, the coals were buried, and the mountain man shifted deeper into his snow cocoon, carrying that last thread of warmth into sleep. You picture this now, the soft glow of embers, the hiss of melting ice, the crackle of pine resin burning. In a world completely silent, except for the storm, you breathe deeply, imagining the taste of cold air and the scent of pine smoke, woven into layers of fur. Surprisingly, this doesn't feel frightening anymore. It feels ancient, instinctive, almost peaceful. And that's when you realize something. Mountain men didn't conquer the cold. They adapted to it until winter became a companion. Instead of a killer, their bodies learned to accept the discomfort, to ignore the sharp sting of wind, to sleep lightly and wake quickly. Years of exposure changed them. Historians still argue whether they became physically tougher or simply mentally resigned to the brutality of their surroundings. Whatever the truth, their survival record speaks for itself. Many lived through winters that even experienced settlers considered impossible. You shift again, warming your hands between your thighs. Just as they did, you curl your toes, wiggling them inside imaginary moccasins, lined with fur and hope. The storm outside still rages, still sings, still tries to bury the world. But inside your snow trench, this tiny pocket of breath-warmed air, you are safe. For now, mountain men never trusted the night completely. They knew storms could change suddenly, that predators roamed freely, that frostbite took fingers, quietly and without warning. But they also knew that surviving until dawn was victory enough. You breathe slowly. The heat grows. The cold waits outside. And you understand, in a way that feels deep and powerful, that mountain men were not superhuman. They were simply human beings who learned to sleep in the arms of winter itself. And now, so are you. The wind has been roaring for so long that you no longer remember what silence sounds like. At first, the storm felt like an intruder. Loud, violent, aggressive. But now, after so many hours, it feels like something else entirely. Not an attack, but a siege. A long, unbroken test of patience, endurance, and the limits of human hope. You're back in a cabin now. Your mind drifts between realities. Mountain man trenches, wagon shelters, snow caves. But your body lies again, beneath the familiar weight of pioneer quilts. Only this time, the cold is different. It's quieter, heavier, as though the storm has settled into place. For the long haul, outside, snow has risen so high that nearly the entire cabin is buried. There is no horizon. There is no world. Just white, a cold so absolute, it becomes its own kind of silence. Inside, the air is thin, not dangerously thin yet, but thin enough that you can feel the difference in the depth of your breaths. And this was the true fear of multi-day blizzards. Not freezing, not hunger, but oxygen. Pioneers knew instinctively that snow pressed against every wall, like a slow, suffocating weight. Cabins weren't airtight, but storms like this made them close enough to feel the pressure building. You sit up slowly, listening for something, a sound, a vibration, a clue about the world outside. All you hear is the soft wooden groan of the beams overhead. Each groan is a reminder that the storm is still stacking snow on your roof. A known historical fact: many pioneer cabins collapsed under accumulated snow because their roofs were built for speed, not strength. You glance up. A hairline crack runs across one of the rafters. Thin, pale, like a scar opening its eye. It wasn't there yesterday. You feel your breath catch. You wrap the quilts tighter and shift your gaze toward the shutter. You can't see outside. The windows are packed with solid white. It feels like being trapped inside the belly of winter itself. A deep rumble echoes through the cabin. Not thunder, not wind, but the sound of snow settling and compressing around the walls. You swallow hard. This is the moment when pioneers had to act with quiet, steady precision. They didn't panic. Panic was fuel for mistakes, and mistakes were deadly in storms like this. You move to the shutter and begin clearing snow from the top and sides, not to see outside, but to ensure that at least one opening remains usable. If the door becomes blocked, many families learned this the hard way. Doors froze shut, entire homes entombed, air thinning in slow, terrifying increments. You scrape at the icy seams with numb fingers. Frost falls like powder glass onto the floorboards. Even that tiny movement makes the air feel clearer. You return to the bed and settle again. The cabin creaks. The storm presses. The cold breathes around your ankles. But the danger isn't just the snow. It's the length of the storm itself. One night was manageable. 2 nights were frightening. But 3, 4, 5 days, that level of storm, turned hope into something fragile. Historians still argue whether the great multi-day blizzards of the late 1800s were as long-lasting as pioneer journals claimed. Some insist settlers exaggerated the timeline. Others argue the storms were far worse than any modern reconstruction suggests. One thing is certain: the psychological toll was real. You imagine a family here. Mother, father, children, all wrapped in quilts, huddled together, counting the hours by the dim light of a single candle stub. Rations shrinking, breath visible, nerves fraying, as every groan of the roof felt like a warning, a marginal curiosity. Some families sang during the worst nights, soft hymns, repeated endlessly, to keep fear at bay and to reassure children that the world outside would eventually return. You close your eyes and almost hear it, a faint, trembling melody, woven through the roar of the wind. The candle on the table flickers, casting a tiny warmth across the freezing air. Its flame bends, as if bowing to the storm's pressure. You watch your breath drift upward, slowly, quietly, like a ghost departing. Your eyelids grow heavy, not from comfort, not from peace, but from exhaustion, the same exhaustion that carried pioneers through the endless nights when storms refused to end. You tuck the quilts around your neck and exhale softly. You don't know if the storm will end tonight. You don't know if the roof will hold. You don't know when the door will open again to a world that looks like a world. But pioneers didn't know either. And still, they rested when they could. They closed their eyes. They breathed. They survived, just as you are surviving now, in the heart of a blizzard that has no mercy and no intention of ending soon. You lie there in the dim quiet, wrapped in quilts layered so thick they feel like a soft, woolen fortress. But the storm outside, still raging, still relentless, has changed the soundscape around you. It's no longer just wind, no longer just pressure, no longer just the distant muffled drone of snow piling against the walls. Now the cabin itself has begun to speak. A soft tick near the rafters, a sudden pop from the logs, a long, groaning creak that vibrates through the floorboards. You freeze, listening. The noises echo through the small room, like the settling bones of an old giant. These were the sounds every pioneer knew, the language of a home, caught in the battle between heat and cold. You shift slightly, your breath drifting into the icy air, and listen again. Tick, pop, crack, groan, not random, not chaotic, but patterned. The slow, inevitable music of a structure shrinking under winter's grip. Wood contracts as temperatures fall. Nails slide within their sockets. Boards twist and adjust as moisture freezes and expands. To modern ears, these sounds might feel eerie, even supernatural. To the pioneers, they were a nightly companion, a well-known historical fact. Pioneer cabins could become so cold that the logs shifted with enough force to sound like gunshots in the night, a startling sound, especially in the pitch black of winter evenings, with wolves, strangers, and danger never too far away. You pull the quilts closer as another sharp pop echoes from the far wall. Your heart jumps, just like theirs did. Settlers wrote about these noises often. The house cracking in the frost, the beams speaking, the wall spirits knocking. Some described the sounds as if the cabin were alive and complaining about the cold. Others believed the noises were warnings, omens from restless winter spirits who wander the plains, searching for warmth. This belief wasn't isolated. It echoed folklore, carried across oceans, from Scandinavia, Germany, Scotland, lands where winter was a creature in its own right. Historians still argue whether pioneers genuinely believed these supernatural explanations, or whether such stories were simply poetic ways of describing the strange sounds of a freezing home, a marginal curiosity. In some regions, families tap back at the walls as a gesture of defiance or humor, as if telling the winter spirits, "We hear you, but you won't scare us." The storm gusts again, and the cabin shutters rattle violently. Your eyes snap in that direction, just in time to see the wooden frame shudder under the force of the wind. Then comes the low, trembling groan of the entire structure settling, like an old wooden ship caught in frozen seas. You breathe out slowly, letting your breath form, a soft cloud that drifts upward toward the frost-coated rafters. The cold changes sound. It sharpens it, amplifies it, turns small movements into strange echoes that travel through the wood, like whispers in a tunnel. You close your eyes and listen. There, a faint crackling near the floor. The straw beneath the boards is freezing and shifting, creating tiny snapping sounds that feel almost alive. There, a soft tapping near the door, not from wind, but from the contraction of iron nails, pulling tighter into the wood. There, a brittle, crystalline sound from the chinking as frost grows between tiny gaps in the mud and straw. The entire cabin has become an orchestra of cold. Each creak of violin, each papa drum, each groan a low, drawn cello note, vibrating in your chest. And in the center of it all, you, small, wrapped, breathing slowly, so your body heat stays sealed beneath the quilts. You listen so deeply that the sounds take on rhythm, a creak when the wind pushes, a pop when a beam adjusts, a low crackle as frost climbs the walls, like tiny climbing vines of ice. It's unsettling, and yet somehow calming, because these sounds mean the cabin is still holding, still fighting, still resisting the weight, pressing against it. If the cabin were silent, that would be far worse. Silence would mean the wood was too cold to flex, too brittle to adjust, too stressed to bend, instead of break. But these noises, this conversation between the structure and the storm, is proof that the home is alive. In its own way, a companion, a guardian, a partner in the night. You press your palm against the nearest log wall. It's freezing, but solid. You whisper softly, not out of superstition, but out of shared effort. Hold, because that's what pioneers did. On long winter nights, they encouraged their homes, as if speaking to a beast of burden or a stubborn mule. It sounds absurd now, but then again, when a storm lasted days and collapse was a real danger, you talk to the walls too. The cabin groans again, deep and resonant, like an ancient voice acknowledging your request. You settle deeper into your quilts, listening to the cold conversation, the storm's pressure, the wood's protest. This is the sound of a cabin freezing. This is the voice of winter on the frontier. And tonight, you understand it in a way few modern people ever will. The cabin settles again, another long, tired groan that vibrates through the rafters, like an old voice repeating an old warning. You lie still, listening, thinking of all the nights, just like this one, that early settlers endured. And slowly, as warmth gathers beneath the quilts, another thought begins to rise. Not about the cold, not about the storm, but about what moments like this actually meant in the broader story of the frontier. Because modern historians have been arguing for decades about a deceptively simple question. Were the pioneers resilient, or were they just lucky? You breathe softly and settle deeper into your bedding, as if joining the debate yourself. On one side are the resilient scholars, the ones who insist that the frontier forged a uniquely tough, adaptable people. They argue that settlers survived impossible odds, endured climates they didn't understand, and overcame challenges that would break most of us today. They point to diaries filled with practical ingenuity, to communities rebuilding after storms, to women sewing quilts until their fingers bled, to men digging families out of drifts with bare, frostbitten hands, Resilience, they say, wasn't an accident. It was culture. It was identity. It was the very thing that made the expansion of early America possible at all. You exhale slowly and imagine those scholars nodding, hand clasped, as snow howls outside their metaphorical windows. But the other side is just as convincing, perhaps more so on a night like this. These historians argue that the myth of resilience is exaggerated, that survival wasn't heroic. It was statistical. For every settler who lived through a storm like this, there were others who did not. People froze in sod houses when roofs collapsed, children suffocated when drifts sealed their doors, families lost in whiteouts were never found until spring thaw revealed their final resting places. The critics of frontier romanticism say luck was the true force behind survival. Luck of weather, luck of timing, luck of proximity to neighbors, luck of which direction the wind decided to blow. And as you lie here, listening to the storm, pressing against the cabin walls, you understand the argument. Because nothing tonight feels controlled, nothing feels guaranteed, nothing feels like a triumph of human will over nature's chaos. It feels like endurance. It feels like patience. It feels like waiting for the storm to become bored and move on. But maybe you think slowly. The truth is not one side or the other. Maybe the pioneers survived because resilience and luck were woven together like the layers of quilts currently wrapped around you. You picture the layers. Luck was the weather, not dropping 10 more degrees. Resilience was sewing another quilt anyway. Luck was the storm, shifting slightly east. Resilience was sealing the door cracks with rags and snow. Luck was the roof holding. Resilience was checking it every hour with shaking, half-frozen hands. Both mattered. Both were essential. Both are woven deeply into the story of nights like this one. A marginal curiosity emerges in your memory. Some scholars argue that the idea of the frontier hero was created long after the fact, largely by dime novels, Victorian illustrations, and later Hollywood films. In those retellings, storms were backdrops, survival was romantic, and fear was for dramatic effect. But the journals you've imagined tonight, the lived experience of the settlers, tell a different story. Theirs is a story of trembling hands, thin quilts, collapsing roofs, and hours of anxious listening to the sound of their home freezing. You shift your weight, feeling the straw mattress crinkle beneath you. Every sound the cabin makes feels like evidence in the ongoing academic debate about who these people truly were. Were they heroes, victims, pragmatists, fools, visionaries? Historians still can't decide. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe people aren't meant to fit neatly into categories, especially people who lived in a world so harsh that even their homes could become crushing tombs. If the snow fell wrong, you take a slow breath and imagine a pioneer mother soothing her child with a calm voice. Even as fear curls tight inside her chest, you picture a father checking the roof beam for the 10th time with numb fingers and a quiet prayer. You imagine a teenager listening to the storm and pretending not to be scared so younger siblings feel safe. Is that resilience? Yes, absolutely. Is it also luck that the cabin holds? Yes, absolutely. The debate suddenly feels small compared to the reality you feel in your bones. The reality that survival was not philosophical. It was physical, raw, immediate, desperate, deeply human. The cabin creaks again, a long, low sigh, like an exhausted animal. You reach out instinctively and touch the nearest wall, ice cold under your fingertips. There, you think softly, that's resilience. And the fact that the wall is still standing, that's luck. Together, they form the quiet truth of frontier life. You settle back beneath the quilts, feeling the warmth building slowly around you. As the storm continues its ancient argument with the wooden beams, and as your eyes begin to grow heavy, you realize something comforting. Tonight, you don't have to take a side. You don't have to decide which scholars are right or which story is the truer one. All you have to do is rest, just like they did, knowing that resilience brought you this far, and luck will carry you into the morning. You lie quietly under the layered quilts, your breath rising in soft clouds that vanish into the chilled cabin air. The storm is still out there, a vast engine of wind and ice. But inside the small wooden room, something begins to shift, a gentle awareness that pioneers were never truly alone in their struggle against the cold. Because long before pioneers arrived, long before sod houses and wagons and mountain men, other cultures had already mastered the delicate art of staying warm in winters far worse than this. And the settlers, desperate and freezing, leaned heavily on that wisdom. Tonight, you feel that inheritance settling across your shoulders, like another quilt, ancient, deeply used, stitched with knowledge from countless generations. You take a slow breath and begin to trace the lineage of winter survival techniques that made their way into frontier life. The first, and perhaps most influential, came from indigenous nations, tribes of the Great Plains, the Rockies, and the northern forests, had developed winter knowledge, so advanced that even European explorers were humbled by it. You imagine a Lakota winter camp now, low lodges built with hides, stretched over wooden poles, insulated with snow, in a way that mirrored the snow huts of Arctic peoples, thousands of miles away. Inside those lodges, buffalo robes were piled thick, and stones were heated, and fires outside, then carried indoors to radiate warmth. The method feels familiar, doesn't it? A known historical fact. Many pioneer warming techniques, heated stones, layered hides, windbreak constructions, were directly borrowed from indigenous practices. You shift slightly, feeling your quilt pile as a descendant of that ancient logic. Another technique the pioneers embraced came from Scandinavian immigrants, Swedes, Norwegians, and Finns, who arrived with generations of cold weather knowledge carved into their bones. These settlers introduced wool layering systems, logging insulation techniques, and the concept of sleeping hot, living cold, which meant saving all the warmth and energy for nighttime, when survival truly mattered. They taught neighbors to line walls with moss, to use birch bark as a windbreak, and to bury food in snow so it wouldn't freeze solid. You picture a Scandinavian log home, built with impossibly tight seams, the kind of craftsmanship that looked almost magical to American-born settlers, accustomed to drafty cabins. You breathe out, imagining the smell of pine sap and warm wool mittens drying near a stove. Then there were the heat tricks, brought by immigrants from Eastern Europe and Russia, people who had survived brutal winters for centuries. They introduced brick and clay stoves that held heat for hours, even after the fire died. Heavy, efficient, almost like early versions of thermal batteries. Some families copied the design, using stone or clay to make small radiant heaters they kept near their beds. Not perfect, but effective enough to soften the worst nights. Historians still argue how widespread these adaptations were, versus how often they were limited to specific settlements. But the truth is clear. Frontier survival was not purely European, nor purely American. It was blended, mixed, braided, borrowed. And then there were the unexpected heat hacks from cultures far to the south. Mexican and southwestern indigenous traditions introduced adobe construction, thick earthen walls that absorb heat during the day and released it slowly at night. Early settlers in New Mexico and parts of Texas learned to build adobe rooms that stayed warm long after the last sunlight faded. You think of how strange it must have felt for travelers raised in cold forests to discover that Earth itself could become a thermal blanket if shaped properly. You exhale softly and let the idea settle. Heat held by soil, released through the night, like a slow, breathing creature. Further north, French-Canadian trappers brought with them some of the most effective cold weather sleeping techniques of all. They slept with boots inside blankets, mittens tucked under armpits, hats tied around their chins, shared camp blankets, stitched from multiple pelts, like enormous sleeping sacks. And most importantly, they taught pioneers to never sleep with a damp sock, a rule that saved countless toes from frostbite. A marginal curiosity, some French trappers rubbed their feet with bear grease before sleep to lock in warmth. Pioneers rarely embraced this idea, but it lingered as a rumor. In frontier folk knowledge, your toes curl instinctively under the quilts. Another layer of inherited wisdom. You settle deeper, tucking your hands beneath the bedding. The cabin moans again, but the sound feels more distant now, as though the combined techniques of so many cultures had woven themselves into the walls around you. Historians still debate whether the frontier was truly a melting pot or whether cultural exchange was patchy and uneven. But in cold like this, in storms that lasted days, in nights where breath froze in the air, people shared everything they knew, not out of generosity, out of necessity. Winter forced cooperation, where politics and prejudice often failed. You imagine a pioneer family learning from an indigenous neighbor how to place pine boughs between sod layers to block the wind. You imagine a Scandinavian settler showing an American-born farmer how to seal roof seams with moss paste. You imagine a Mexican craftsman teaching an entire community how to build a thick-walled adobe home that stayed warm long after dusk. This was the true frontier, not isolated cabins, lost in a blizzard, but people reaching for one another, across cultures, languages, and traditions, trading small pieces of wisdom that save lives. In nights just like this, you pull the quilts up and let the warmth settle, and for the first time tonight, you feel not just warmth, but connection, a sense that you're wrapped, not only in blankets, but in the shared memory of every culture that understood winter long before pioneers arrived. You lie beneath your heavy quilts, listening to the distant hum of the storm, and for a moment, just a brief moment, you almost fall into the modern fantasy of pioneer life. You know the one, the postcard image, the holiday movie version, the glossy painting sold in gift shops, and printed on coffee mugs, a log cabin glowing with warm firelight, snow falling softly outside like powdered sugar, a gentle rocking chair, a cheerful child in wool socks, sipping something warm. What those scenes? That makes the frontier look dreamy and soft and romantic. And then a gust of icy air slips through the floorboards and taps your ankle like a sarcastic reminder. The cozy cabin winter was mostly a myth. You shift, the straw mattress rustling beneath you, and the real truth unfolds around your cold fingers and frosted breath. Pioneer cabins were not warm. They were not comfortable. They were not charming winter retreats. They were survival boxes, drafty, leaky, frost-lined, and barely capable of keeping families alive. When storms like this one hit, a known historical fact, many frontier cabins were colder inside than the temperature outdoors during certain blizzards because wind whistled through the walls and heat dissipated instantly. Movies never show the frost growing on the inside logs. They never show children waking up with icy blankets or adults scraping ice off their pillowcases before breakfast. But that was reality. You run your hand across the quilt and feel the brittlest edges, frozen stiff, just like the pioneers described. Hollywood never includes the sound of water freezing in a wash basin overnight, or the sight of your own breath fogging in the living room. They don't show the cracked fingers from constant cold, the damp clothes never drying, or the snow that blew indoors through shutter seams as if it paid rent. You let out a slow breath and watch it float upward to join the faint layer of frost forming along the rafters. Not exactly a charming winter cottage. Another myth worth shattering is the fireplace fantasy. People imagine a stone hearth blazing cheerfully all season long, casting warm orange light across the walls. But most early American cabins didn't even have a fireplace, and many that did found them nearly useless. Cold winds reversed the draft. Smoke billowed indoors. Chimneys froze over. Fires sucked warm air out of the room faster than they heated it. You picture it now, a family tending a struggling flame, only to watch frost grow. On the opposite wall, the cozy fireplace winter was a myth almost entirely created by later artists and Victorian nostalgia. Then there's the myth of endless firewood. Paintings show tidy log piles, neatly chopped, ready for use. The truth? Pioneers often ration wood, the way we ration chocolate on a diet, sparingly, reluctantly, and with a constant sense that it would never be enough. In the Great Plains, trees were so scarce that settlers burned twisted bundles of grass, dried buffalo chips, or corn cobs just to keep a flame alive. You imagine a fire made of dry manure. Not exactly the cozy scene people want on a Christmas card. The next myth is even stranger. That winter was peaceful. Silent nights, gentle snowfall, hushed serenity. But the frontier winter was loud. Wind screamed like a living thing. Walls groaned. Roofs cracked. Snow hissed through every tiny gap. A marginal curiosity. Some settlers wrote that during the worst storms, the sound outside was so overwhelming. It felt like living inside a drum. Not peaceful, not quiet, and certainly not cozy. But the biggest myth of all might be the image of the happy, smiling frontier family, gathered by lamplight, reading Bible passages through the long winter evenings. You glance toward the unlit lantern on the table. Pioneer nights weren't like that. Not most of the time. People were exhausted, freezing, hungry, their hands raw, their joints aching, their patience threadbare. They didn't sit around, feeling inspired. They didn't admire this simple life. They didn't romanticize hardship. They endured it. One historian even wrote that the frontier winter was a season not of charm, but of relentless negotiation. With cold, hunger, and uncertainty, you shift your weight and feel the cold seep through the quilts, just enough to remind you that the pioneers were fighting. Every hour, every night, every breath. No cozy cabin, no glittering postcard, just survival. And yet, there's a strange beauty in the reality. Not the beauty of comfort, not the beauty of holiday nostalgia, but the beauty of perseverance, the beauty of families huddling together, the beauty of determination woven into every quilt stitch, the beauty of hope held between frostbitten fingers. On nights when everything seemed lost, you breathe slowly. Your breath drifts and fades, and in that quiet moment, you feel the truth settle around you. The pioneer winter was harsh, fearsome, unforgiving, but within that hardship was something deeply human. The fierce, stubborn will to keep going, to hold on, to wake up in a world of ice, and try again. And that, far more than the cozy myth, is the real heart of the winter frontier. The cold has settled into a rhythm now, a deep, bone-dragging stillness that makes the hours stretch into something almost unreal. You lie beneath your heavy quilts, breath misting into the dimness, and you can feel it in your chest that this night is different, not because the storm is louder, not because the cold is sharper, but because the cold has become total, the kind of cold that doesn't just fill the air, it narrows the world, shrinks the possibilities, turns time into something slow and heavy, like oil freezing in a jar. This is the night pioneers later wrote about in journals, with phrases like, "the night that would not end," "the longest freeze I recall," "the darkness that refused to pass." A well-known historical fact During certain 19th century cold waves, temperatures dropped so low that ink froze in inkwells, even inside people's homes. Tonight is one of those nights. You picture it now, a small wooden writing desk, a quill stuck in a cup of solid ink, its black surface glimmering with frost, like a frozen pond in miniature. The cabin around you is colder than ever. Your breath doesn't drift away now. It hangs, lingering above your face, before finally dissolving. The walls are coated with a slick, glassy sheen of ice. Even the quilts feel heavier as fibers stiffen with trapped frost. You shift slightly. The mattress crackles beneath you. The straw inside it has frozen in clusters. Your muscles move slower, not dangerously, just sluggish, as though each motion has to push against the cold. You listen carefully, try to sense the hour. But in a storm like this, time becomes a stranger. Was it midnight? 1 in the morning? 4? It all blends together into a single, pale stretch of sleepless survival. You swallow, your throat dry and scratchy. Even swallowing feels colder. The candle stub on the table sits unlit, its wax so rigid, you know it would barely burn, even if you tried. Another faint groan echoes through the cabin, not like before, not the bending wood of earlier hours, but something lower, slower, more resigned, the sound of a structure enduring the deepest part of winter. You take a shallow breath and instinctively pull the quilts closer. This is the moment pioneers feared most, the hour the cold seemed to deepen into something aware, something personal, a marginal curiosity. Some settlers believed the coldest hour of night had a spirit, a presence that wandered between homes, testing their resolve. They called it the still hour, or the frost walker, or simply the watcher. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were sincere superstitions or poetic metaphors carried from European folklore. On a night like this, you understand how easily such beliefs could take root. The cabin is too quiet, the dark too thick, the cold too deep to feel entirely empty. You breathe again, slow, steady, a rhythm of defiance against this vast stillness. But it is cold, a cold that presses against your ribs, like a weight. You remember techniques described in old journals, clasping warm rocks under arms, breathing into blankets, tucking hands between thighs, keeping feet together to preserve warmth. You mimic the motions. The warmth is small, but welcome. Minutes pass, or maybe hours. It's impossible to know. The storm has not eased. It has simply stayed the same, an unchanging ocean of white noise. Outside the walls, your eyes drift to the wooden door. Frost rims the edges, like delicate lace. The rag stuffed beneath it is frozen solid, a stiff barricade against the draft. You picture a pioneer family on a night just like this, a mother humming to soothe herself as much as her children, a father pacing to keep his limbs from numbing, children curled tightly like small hibernating animals. No one sleeping deeply, everyone waiting, enduring, holding the line until dawn. And dawn itself will not be a rescue, only a change of color, a thin blue light, replacing the pitch black. You settle again, breath growing slower with each exhale. Then, suddenly, the cabin cracks. A loud, rifle-like snap from the rafters jolts your heart. You grip the quilt, instinctively ducking your shoulders. The sound rings in the air for several long seconds before fading into silence. This was normal, terrifying, but normal. Extreme cold contracts would, so sharply that the beams can split with explosive force. Another known fact, families sometimes slept with one parent awake to monitor the roof. On nights like this, you look up into the dimness. The rafters hold, the roof holds. Your breath loosens a little, but the night is not over. Not yet, not for hours. This is the longest night, the coldest, the hardest, the most relentless. But even in this frozen darkness, there's something ancient, and strangely comforting. This is the deep hard hour of winter, the place where time stretches and the mind quiets, and the only warmth is the warmth you carry within you. A faint shiver moves through your body, not fear, but endurance reaching its limit. And then, so subtly you almost miss it, the wind outside changes tone, a shift, a softening, a small, almost imperceptible sign that the night has reached its peak and is beginning, slowly, to unravel. You exhale shakily, your breath drifting upward in a pale ribbon. You made it through the worst hour. You're still here, still breathing, still wrapped in warmth you made with your own fragile body. And morning, however dim, however cold, is coming. The faint shift in the storm's voice is the first true sign that night is finally loosening its grip. It's not calm yet, not gentle, not quiet, but the roar has changed. Where it once lunged at the cabin, with teeth bared, now it presses against the walls. Like something tired, something fading. You lie perfectly still, beneath your layered quilts, breath floating upward, in slow, drowsy ribbons. Your fingers uncurl a little, your shoulders loosen, and for the first time in hours, maybe longer, you feel something fragile but unmistakable. Relief, not warmth. That'll take time, but relief is its own kind of heat. You take a slow, careful breath. The cabin air is still cold enough to sting your nose, but no longer cold enough to feel dangerous. You shift your feet under the covers and notice the quilts have softened slightly. The frost along the edges is loosening its grip. A thin crackle follows your movement, less rigid than before, like winter releasing its hold, one icy finger at a time. This moment is one pioneers described with silent gratitude, the turning point, the hour when the storm's anger weakens, and the waiting becomes easier to bear. You sit up slowly, your joints stiff, as the cabin greets you with a familiar groan, not the deep, ominous creaks from the middle of the night, but a softer, settling sound, with thawing by degrees. You glance toward the shutter. For the first time in many hours, you think you see the faintest hint of light, filtering through the snow-packed seams. Not sunrise yet, just the earliest whisper of morning gray on the frontier. This small brightness was as comforting as a warm fire. You reach for the quilts and run your hand along the fabric. The stiffness is fading. The icy edges crumble away. Like delicate sugar, you press your palm against the nearest log wall. It's still bitter cold, but no longer the deep, biting cold that made the entire structure groan. A known historical fact, the hour before dawn was often the warmest hour of a winter storm as wind patterns shifted and cloud cover thickened overhead. Pioneers learned to recognize that moment. By instinct alone, you rise from the bed with slow, careful movements. Your limbs feel sluggish, half frozen, but capable. You move to the shutter, pressing your ear against it. The wind is still there, still wild, but its edge is duller, blunted. The blizzard is weakening. You take in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Your breath hangs for a shorter moment than before. The worst is truly passing. You turn toward the center of the cabin. The floor, once icy enough to sting your toes, now feels merely cold, not painful. The air is still sharp, still white around the edges, but something else is present now. Your presence, your heat, your persistence. All night, your body has been fighting the cold in a silent, stubborn rhythm. Every breath a small flame, every heartbeat a slow pulse of heat against the vast cold pressing outside. And it worked, just like it worked for thousands of settlers who faced nights like this, without modern comforts, without certain tomorrow, without anything but quilts, determination, and the belief that dawn would eventually come. You settle back onto the straw mattress, pulling the quilts to your chin. As the faint morning light continues to grow, a marginal curiosity, some diaries describe the moment after the worst part of a blizzard, as if the house itself exhaled, as though the cabin felt relief too. You glance around the room, the frost-softened rafters, the quiet table, the stillness hanging like gentle fog, and you can almost feel the cabin relaxing with you. Every sound now is softer, gentler, less like warning, and more like rest. You close your eyes and sink deeper into the warm pocket you've created through the long night. And now, as the storm fades and the world begins to thaw, one breath at a time, the final, sleepy descent begins. This is the moment pioneers often fell asleep for the first real rest after a night-long battle with cold. Not during the storm's fury, not during the worst hours, but right here, in the quiet between the storm and sunrise. You feel that moment yourself now, a soft heaviness settling over your limbs, a warm blooming behind your ribs, your breath deepening into a slow, steady rhythm. You're safe. You're warm enough. The storm is ending, and the night has finally given you permission to rest. Your eyelids grow heavier. Your breath slows. Your thoughts loosen into gentle shapes. Nothing pressed, nothing urgent, nothing cold, just quiet, just stillness, just the soft hum of a world returning to itself after a long, frozen night. And now comes the long, drifting, sleep-pulling closing. Hey, before you settle completely, just take one long, slow breath with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth, and let everything inside you soften. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest wherever they land as the last traces of the storm fade from your mind. Tonight, you traveled through ice-crusted cabins, snow-choked plains, mountain man trenches, and the deepest, coldest hours of a frontier winter. You felt the walls creak. You heard the rafters groan. You breathed through whiteout silence and waited out the long night, just like the people who live this history for real. And you made it. You reached the quiet place. After the storm, the warm hollow, inside the cold, the gentle gray, that comes before dawn. Now, you get to rest. Nothing else matters. No tasks, no worries, no cold waiting outside. Just this moment. This soft, slow moment that holds you like a warm quilt. Feel your breath settling. Feel your thoughts drifting like snowflakes, losing their sharp edges. You're safe. You're warm enough. You're allowed to let go. Let the world dim. Let your breath quiet. Let your mind wander in slow, peaceful circles until it dissolves into sleep. You've reached the end of the storm. You've reached the calm. Now drift slowly, gently, into rest. Sweet dreams.